Hi. So this week we have a special double portion, Vayekhal and Pekudei. It's the last two portions in the book of Exodus, second book of the 5 books. We also have a special Shabbat. It is Shabbat HaChodesh, the Shabbat that comes right before the month of Nisan and is therefore connected to Passover. So double portion and 2 Torahs we read from, and a special Haftorah. So I'd like to cover a number of those for anybody who's new with us tonight. What we're doing is I've been looking at a creative way of understanding the Torah and the Haftarah with the following idea that there's nothing new under the sun. What goes on today is probably what goes on back then in Bible times. And what went on then is relatable to the things that we're dealing with today. So I've put together a creative literary approach, and I wanted to share a number of pieces with you tonight. So let's start with Vayekhal in the book of Exodus. In case you have a book, a Torah, a Chumash, we're in chapter 35, verse 25 and 26. What happens in Vayekhal, the end of Exodus, is they've been given the instructions about putting together, constructing, erecting the Mishkan, the portable temple, the tabernacle that traveled with the Israelites for 40 years. And one of the things that we read after they make the furniture, the ark and the menorah and the altar and the table, all of those things, we're also told that there were a lot of curtains and other such things that had to be made to create the perimeter, to create the tent, to create the curtain that separated one part of the holy area from the most holy of holies where the ark was kept. And we read the following verses. We're told, "And all the skilled women spun with their own hands and brought what they had spun in blue, purple, crimson yarns, and in fine linen. And all the women who excelled in that skill spun the goat's hair." So everybody is involved, and especially the women involved with spinning and with sewing, and whether it's crocheting, whatever needle crafts. So here's what I came to my mind. The notion of Jewish girls with needle and thread throughout history. So we're going to work backwards, starting with the Torah portion. Let's assume that we're talking about June, circa 13th century BCE. And the verse again tells us, "And all the skilled women spun with their own hands and brought what they had spun in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen." So here's what I imagine. A needle pricks a finger and a drop of blood appears. The woman raises her hands to the heavens and says, "See, Adonai, how much we love you. We brought you our gold earrings, silver bracelets, copper mirrors, and now we even offer you our blood." She blots the drop of her blood onto the purple yarn and it is immediately absorbed into the material. Okay, we can imagine that happening. Now let's fast forward 3,000 years. Another story of Jewish girls with needle and thread. It's March 1911. The girls are let into the 8th floor of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory early in the morning. It will be a very long day with no breaks and no time off for lunch. They will return home long after dark. Many of these workers should still be in high school, but the few dollars they earn means the difference between their family starving or having enough to eat. Though it is cold outside, it is cramped and stiflingly hot and extremely noisy inside. A needle pricks a finger and a drop of blood appears. The teenaged worker quickly wraps her handkerchief around the bloody finger, making sure that the material is not ruined. If the boss sees it, he will dock her wages or fire her on the spot. Let's jump ahead to January of 1943. Jewish girls with needle and thread. The new girls who arrived on the trains just yesterday are marched into the workshop. They are ordered to sit at the empty spaces around the tables. The girls who sat there yesterday were only this morning marched into the gas chamber. And even now their ashes float above Auschwitz. A German officer barks their orders. You will make uniforms for the arriving prisoners. Blue stripes on gray material. Work fast and efficiently, or else there will always be others to take your place. In the hurry to meet the quota, a needle pricks a finger and a drop of blood appears. The prisoner who will wear this shirt and pants will not notice nor complain. Soon, his own blood will stain the uniform. And we jump ahead 5 years to May of 1948. Jewish girls with needle and thread. Today, the British will lower the Union Jack and leave us. A Jewish nation will be born, and an Israeli flag will be raised. In a small factory on the back street in Tel Aviv sit Jewish girls, needle and thread in their hands, sewing blue horizontal stripes to a white rectangle of cloth. A 6-pointed Star of David is affixed to the center. In the hurry to produce these symbols of statehood before the state comes into being, a needle pricks a finger and a drop of blood appears. Only a sharp eye will notice the tiny red stain on the white background. This is a flag and a nation that was born in blood. So that's our first piece from the Torah reading. We move now to chapter 38, verse 8. And there's something strange when people brought their gifts. As we mentioned, they brought their golden earrings. One of the things that apparently the women brought were mirrors. Now, back in those days, a mirror was basically a piece of metal that was burnished and shined so that you could see your reflection in it. Not very well, but that's what a mirror was. And so we read in chapter 38, verse 8, the following. He made the laver of copper. Laver was a giant basin filled with water for the Kohen to wash his hands and feet before offering the sacrifice. He made the laver of copper and its stand of copper from the mirrors of the women who performed tasks at the entrance of the tent of meeting. There's a wonderful midrash that says that when Moses received all the offerings of the people, the material to build, he took the gold, he took the silver. When the women brought their copper mirrors, his initial thought was, this doesn't belong in a temple. A mirror is a symbol of vanity. What does that got to do with the temple, with God? This is the opposite of how do I look, of vanity. And God says, no, take these mirrors. These are more dear to me than everything else. And Moses said, why? What's so great about these mirrors? And he said, the men were being so worked under slavery for 18 hours, maybe more, that when they came home, they just collapsed and went and fell asleep until the morning. And ultimately, women were not sleeping with their husbands. Ultimately, nobody got pregnant. Ultimately, no children were being born. And this could be the end of the Jewish people. What did the women do? They took their mirrors and they made themselves as pretty as possible so that they would look beautiful and be seductive before their husbands. And ultimately, that's what kept the Jewish people going. So God says to Moses, those mirrors are very dear to me. Without them, there wouldn't be a Jewish people. So I was imagining, flipping forward a little bit, I was imagining what place did those mirrors, what role did they play in the Mishkan that had been built? So first I wanted to see them from the perspective of something modern, something that I myself could relate to. Before delivering his sermon on Yom Kippur, the rabbi managed to find a few minutes to slip away and visit the men's room. He emptied his bladder. There was already enough pressure on him without feeling more pressure from there, and went over to the sink to wash his hands. As he dried his hands, he looked at himself in the mirror. First, he made sure there was nothing distracting about his appearance. Hair combed, no dirt on his face, tie properly arranged. Then he took a deep breath. This is the most important speech I'll give all year to the biggest crowd. Help me, God, to deliver it with passion, so that my words move my congregants to sincere tefillah, to doing teshuvah, to deeds of tzedakah. The rabbi took another breath, closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and stared at his reflection in the mirror in the temple bathroom. Okay, let's do this. And out of the men's room, he walked back into the sanctuary and up onto the bima. And the rabbi, of course, was following in a long, distinguished line of men who looked at themselves in the mirror just before the big moment. So let's imagine the temple and the Mishkan. The Kohen Gadol passed the altar in the outer court and stepped up to the laver, to the basin of water. He washed his hands carefully, then lifted them up so that the excess water dripped off. He looked at the image of himself that he saw reflected in the polished copper mirrors that the women had donated to the Mishkan, and which Betzalel and Oholiav had utilized in making the kior, Hebrew word for the laver, the basin. At first, he saw his white beard and his dark eyes. For a moment, he admired the visage that stared back at him. Men usually didn't spend much time looking at themselves in mirrors. That was what women did, and why these mirrors had come from them. Tens of thousands of people are all focusing on me at this very moment. Their fate rests in my hands. How important I am. But then his eyes drifted to the gold band that lay upon his forehead. He saw the letters engraved there, reflected backwards. Hey, Vav, Hey, Yud, Lamed, Shin, Daled, Kuf. He reversed the order in his mind and put the two words together, Kodesh Ladonai, holy to the Lord. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. This is not about me. This is about my standing before God himself, pleading with him to forgive my people. May I be truly worthy, and may I be completely successful. He opened his eyes and stared at himself once again. Okay, let's do this. He walked up to the parochet, pushed it aside, and entered the holy place. So there's an example of modern and an ancient way of understanding mirrors in the temple. Third piece that I want to look at is found in the second of the double portion, Pekude. First one was Vayekhal and Pekude. The word Pekude, the name of the portion, really means accounting. Our Chumash says, these are the records of the tabernacle of the pact meaning the 2 tablets of the 10 commandments, which were drawn up at Moses' bidding, the work of the Levites under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron, the priest. And then we're told again, Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, the tribe of Judah, had made all that the Lord had commanded. At his side was Aholiab, son of Achisamach, of the tribe of Dan. So one of the things that we learn is that here, as the sanctuary is about to be constructed and built, they bring the accounting records, the financial records of how much was collected and how much was spent. And so we read the following: all the gold that was used for the work, in all the work of the sanctuary, the elevation order of gold, when people would bring and raise it and then offer it to the sanctuary, came to 29 talents and 730 shekels by the sanctuary weight. So that's the gold. The silver of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary weight. A half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary weight, for each one who was entered in the records from the age of 20 years up, 603,550 men. Then we're told the 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets for the curtain, 100 sockets to the 100 talents, a talent a socket. And the 1,775 shekels he made hooks for the posts, overlay for their tops and bands around them. And then finally, we're told the copper from the elevation offer came to 70 talents, 2,400 shekels. Of it, he made the sockets for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the copper altar and its copper grating and all the utensils of the altar, the sockets of the enclosure round about and the sockets of the gate of the enclosure and all the pegs of the tabernacle and all the pegs of the enclosure round about. Now let's be honest. We often think that the Torah is supposed to be a deep spiritual book, and sometimes it is. But there are certain sections, maybe most notably the begat section in Genesis. This one gave birth to this one who gave birth to that one. Doesn't really move us religiously, spiritually. And here you have another example. Here we have the records of the treasurer, as it were, who's telling this is what we got, and this is what it was used for, and this is what we spent. And we find all of these details. Only an accountant could love this, right? For most of us, we're bored out of our minds as we hear this section. So I'm imagining the following question. What was the reason that this kind of piece was put into the Torah? Why is it so important? Once again, the rabbis in the Midrash bring a very interesting notion. They say that Moses collected all this stuff, all this money, precious metals, and people began wondering, can we really trust this guy? Doesn't Moses look a little bit heavier to you than he did a couple of months ago? How do we know that he's not keeping the stuff for himself and he's living the good life? So ultimately, according to the Midrash, Moses said, I got to be transparent here. I got to tell everybody exactly what we took in, exactly what we spent, and exactly what it was spent for. Or otherwise, could have a rebellion on our hands. So I'm imagining that Moses had to deal with the finance committee of his shul. And here's how I imagine it went. The finance committee insisted on meeting with Moses. The sanctuary is almost done, and we need an accounting of where the money went. Moses explained that the cost of gold came to 29 talents, 730 shekels. Silver, 100 talents, 1,775 shekels. Copper, 70 talents, 2,400 shekels. The accountants took out their calculators and were very unhappy. Look, Moses, a talent equals 3,000 shekels. So the total expenses of just the precious metals comes to 601,905 shekels. That's not even counting the wood, yarn, the hides needed for the tent, and the oils and spices and animals for the offerings. On the income side, we have 600,000 men over 20, each of whom has to pay dues of half a shekel. You do the math. Our income is 300,000 shekels, and our expenses are more than twice that. How do you plan to pay for all this? Moses said, we could do a fundraiser, maybe a dinner dance, journal honoring the princes of each tribe, maybe a Kol Nidre appeal. We could have people dedicate new prayer books. One member shook his head. Kol Nidre hasn't even been invented yet, and there are no prayer books. One CPA suggested a raise in dues. Others thought that that would just drive away some of the members they already had. Another felt that expenses needed to be cut. It snowed last week, and we had the guy plow out the parking lot in front of the tabernacle. That cost 500 shekels for each inch of snow. Couldn't we just have waited until spring and let the sun melt the mess? Moses was angry at this suggestion. We've got older members who might slip on the ice and break a hip. Another accountant stepped forward and said, do we really need to serve rainbow cookies and gefilte fish at the Kiddush after the Shabbat sacrifice? Can't we just put out some Ritz crackers? Moses finally had had enough. You guys are thinking like this is a business. It's the house of God. But a CPA yelled back, "Well then, let him pay for it." Everyone paused in fear, waiting for thunder and lightning, but none came. Finally, the chairman of the finance committee said, "Moses, you've done a wonderful job in building a magnificent tabernacle here in the desert. You do whatever you can to make this place where our people will be inspired. We'll do whatever we can to keep the costs reasonable, and we'll raise whatever funds we can. Let's not underestimate the willingness of the Jews to step up and make this a great success." Moses thanked the members of the committee for giving of their time and expertise. "Hey, it's 8:30, time for Mariv. Come and help us make a minyan." So that's an explanation, perhaps, of why we're given this accounting in the beginning of the Parsha of Pekudei. So again, 2 Torah readings. By the way, why do we read a double portion? Answer is that the Torah is divided into 5 books. The 5 books are divided into 54 weekly portions. Of course, there are 52 weeks a year, but there's going to be a number of weeks in which we don't read the regular portion. During Passover, the Saturday in between, we read a special portion for Shabbat Chol HaMoed Pesach. Similarly, on Sukkot, we don't read that Saturday a regular portion. So we take off a couple of weeks. And then, depending on whether the year is a leap year or not, we might need to add an entire month, Adar Sheni, in order to make sure that the lunar calendar is in sync with the solar calendar. So lunar calendar having 354 days, solar calendar having 365 days. There's an 11-day difference. If we just had a lunar calendar like Muslims do, then every year holidays would be 11 days earlier than they were the year before. Which means if you went strictly by a lunar calendar, that Passover would be in spring this year. In 6 months, it would be in winter. So there was a problem. Passover needs to come in the spring. So in order to fix the year, 7 times in every 19-year cycle, we add not an extra day, like February 29th, we add an extra month. So imagine once every 3 years, we push the calendar back by about 30 days. It moves forward 11 days each year, and then every 3rd year or so, we move it back about 30 days, so that we're pretty close. And that's the reason why Rosh Hashanah can be early or it could be late, depending on where we are in the cycle. So that's the story. Sometimes we need to double up portions because we have more portions than we have weeks. So this year we need, this is not a leap year. We only have 1 Adar. We need to put in 2 portions together a couple times a year to make sure that we're able to finish the reading of the Torah and the 54 portions in a year, so that every year on Simchas Torah, we can finish the Torah and then start it the next day all over again. So now we come to the Haftarah. There are 4 special Haftorahs that we have before Purim and Passover. The first one is Shekalim. In the ancient times, every year, every family had to give as dues to the temple half a shekel. And right before Adar, the last month of the year, people were reminded, we're about to come to the last month, you have 1 month to get your dues into the temple. So that was Shabbat Shekalim. Next we had Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat of remembering, which always comes right before Purim, because it's about remembering what the Amalekites did to us. Then we have, as we did last week, Shabbat Parah, the Shabbat of the cow, the red heifer, reminding us the necessity to become purified before Passover. Only people who were ritually pure could come to the temple and could offer a sacrifice. If you were impure, by virtue of having been in contact with the dead, you needed to become ritually purified through the ritual of the red heifer. A brownish cow was sacrificed, it was burned, the ashes were mixed with water, people were sprinkled with that mixture, they became purified again. And this week is the fourth of the 4 special Shabbases. This is Shabbat HaChodesh, HaChodesh meaning the month. The month that we're referring to is Nisan, which is considered the first month of the year. Nisan is the month in which Passover comes. So here we're reminded that we need to begin to make all the preparations for Passover, which is in about 2.5 weeks or so. So that's what HaChodesh was about. So here's the story. Parshat HaChodesh is from the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was part of the Jewish people in Jerusalem who were defeated by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Bavel, Babylonia, they came down from what today would be Iraq, and they besieged the city of Jerusalem, ultimately defeated the Jews, destroyed the temple, and destroyed the whole city. And many of the Jews were sent off into exile to Babylonia. That's where we get the famous psalm, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down, there we wept when we remembered Zion. And of course, at a Jewish wedding, the breaking of the glass reminds us of the breaking, the destruction of the temple and of the city. And part of that same psalm says, may my tongue cleave to my mouth, may my right hand lose its cunning, if I do not put Jerusalem above my chiefest joy. So the idea is, what could be more joyful than a wedding? And even at the moment of our greatest happiness, getting married, we still remember the sadness of our history and the destruction of Jerusalem through the breaking of a glass. Okay? So Ezekiel goes into exile with the people. And Ezekiel's job, a prophet can have 2 different kinds of missions. Either he is sent to chastise the people and warn them, unless you change your behavior, God is very unhappy and he's going to punish you. The other mission that a prophet sometimes has is to comfort the people. When there has been a terrible tragedy, it's the role of the prophet to tell the people, don't despair, God still loves you, God will restore you, God will bring us back to our homeland, God will enable us to rebuild the temple. So Ezekiel, almost his entire career was spent as a prophet of comfort. And one of the things that he does is he tries to convince the people, don't give up. We're going back. The temple will be rebuilt. God cares about us. It's going to be all right. The future is going to be bright. Ezekiel was the younger contemporary of another prophet, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, an older man, was around before the destruction of the temple. And Jeremiah had the job of chastising the people, warning them. God is unhappy. God is going to punish us. You better change your ways. You better do something different or else. And then the destruction happens and the Jews are sent away. And it's Ezekiel who the baton is passed to him. And Ezekiel now in Babylonia brings a message of comfort. So in thinking about these two prophets, by the way, how does Ezekiel bring us a story of comfort? Here's the answer, that here are Jews suffering, they're refugees, they're survivors, they're in a strange land, they don't have a temple, they don't have much of a religion anymore. Their religion was all based around the temple. Ezekiel is saying, we're going to go back, God will restore us, we will have a temple. And Ezekiel brings a message of, imagine the following. And he tells people, here's what I see. Here's what's going to happen, maybe even in our own lifetime. Once again, there will be a magnificent temple in Jerusalem. Once again, at the holidays, pilgrims will come from all over Israel and even beyond, and they will bring their sacrifices. And this is what the temple is going to look like, and this is what the day is going to be about, and here's what's going to happen. And he paints this picture. Some people said, who you kidding? It'll never happen. Here's the interesting thing. In 586 BCE, temple is destroyed. It's a couple of decades later that the Persians defeat the Babylonians. And whereas the Babylonians said, we want the Jews out of their land, we're going to subjugate them, the Persians took a very different approach. They said, as long as the Jews are loyal to us, if they want to go back to their country, if they want to rebuild the temple, it's perfectly fine with us. And it was about 70 years after the destruction that Cyrus allowed the Jews in Babylonia, now Persia, to go back to Israel, and the temple, the second temple, is now built. So Ezekiel basically gives us this picture of what's going to happen when all of these things take place. Now, you know, most people who heard this probably said, who you kidding? You're dreaming. You're out of your mind. It'll never happen. And Ezekiel says, here's my vision, and I think it will. So here's the specifics of what he says. He tells people, the day will come, thus said the Lord, on the first day of the month of Nisan, when we're back in Jerusalem, when we've built a temple, you shall take a bull of the herd without blemish, and you shall purify the sanctuary. The priest shall take some of the blood of the purification offering and apply it to the doorposts of the temple. And it goes on. And then we read the following. In verse 3, chapter 46, the common people shall worship before the Lord on Sabbaths and new moons at the entrance of the same gate. And one of the things that Ezekiel tells the people, listen to this, on the 14th day of the first month, in other words, on Passover, you shall have the Passover sacrifice. And during a festival of 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. On that day, the prince shall provide a bull of purification offering on behalf of himself and of the entire population. And during the 7 days of the festival, he shall provide daily for 7 days 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish for a burnt offering to the Lord, and 1 goat daily for a purification offering. Okay? So Ezekiel is saying, this is what's going to happen. Trust me, it's going to come to pass. Some people said, if we could only believe you. Other people said, you're crazy. You're out of your mind. Never in a million years. Well, it was in 70 years that it actually happened. So given that background, I was interested in the following question. The difference between a Jeremiah and an Ezekiel, right? And the message that they bring. Now, look, the obvious answer is, the traditional answer is, God told Jeremiah, I'm not happy with the people, you go and you tell them they better change or else. And then after they didn't, and after the people suffered, God picks Ezekiel and says, you go and comfort the people, tell them, I'm not mad, we're going to bring them back, it's going to be all right. There's a bright future. But I was wondering more about the 2 different men and the messages that they brought. And so here's what I came up with. I was thinking about the eulogy by Ted Kennedy at Bobby Kennedy's funeral. And you'll remember the very famous line that he spoke about his brother. And so I've changed it a little bit. Some prophets look to the past and ask why. Others look to the future and ask, why not? So I'm imagining Jeremiah, who in his lamentation for the destroyed temple, you should know that besides there being a book of Jeremiah, there's also another book, one of the 5 Megillot, called Lamentations, the book of Vayekhal. And what Lamentations is, it's a book of sad speeches about the destruction of the temple. And it's written by somebody who was an eyewitness to the account. And according to the rabbis, some biblical scholars disagree, but according to the Midrash and the rabbis and Jewish tradition, not only did Jeremiah write everything in the book of Jeremiah, but he also wrote the book of Lamentations. And in that book, in chapter 2, verse 7, Jeremiah says, the Lord has rejected his altar, meaning the temple, disdained his sanctuary. He has handed over to the foe the walls of its citadels. And then we contrast that with the Haftorah that we read this Shabbos from the prophet Ezekiel, who says in his vision of a rebuilt temple, thus said the Lord God, on the first day of the first month, you shall take a bull of the herd without blemish, and you shall purify the sanctuary. The common people shall worship before the Lord on Sabbaths and new moons at the entrance of the same gate. So it struck me that Jeremiah is trying to answer the question, why did all this bad stuff happen to us? Ezekiel is less concerned with the why of the past. He's more concerned with why not? Why can't we go back? Why can't we have a bright future? Why can't we rebuild the temple and reestablish our place in our own home? And so, to me, that line of about Bobby Kennedy seemed to ring true. Some prophets look to the past and ask why. Others look to the future and ask, why not? So at 8:30, we'll continue with our Mariv service. We've been live streaming each night, and we'll continue Thursday night as well. Friday night, we will live stream our Shabbos service at 6:30. Services take about 40-45 minutes if you've never joined us. So I hope we'll see you on Friday night at 6:30 for Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv. And then Saturday morning, we will live stream our Shabbat morning services. We'll begin at 9:45, last till a little bit before noon. And Cantor Chesler and I will be here, and Rich Rothstein will facilitate. And I think it'll just be the three of us, but hopefully you'll join us and other people will. And we'll continue with services. And for those who need to say Kaddish, you'll be able to do that virtually. So 15 minutes, we'll pick up with Mari.